Right, welcome everybody to the Planning Committee on, oh God, we got an echo. Can you all make sure that you're just on chat rather than actually in? Don't actually join the meeting, just come in on chat. That's okay. Okay, we'll start again. That's better. I'm good. So welcome to the Planning Committee on today, the 2nd of August. Can we? I'm Councillor Phil Murphy. I'm the chair of the Planning Committee. The Vice Chair is Dale Rook, who's online today. Dale, would you like to come in?
Hi all, Councillor Dale Rook, I'm Vice Chair of the Planning Committee.
Okay, and officers, Craig, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Chair. Craig O'Connor, Head of Planning for Monmouthshire County Council.
I'm Philip Thomas, Development Services Manager with the Council.
Andrew Jones, Development Management Area Team Manager.
Joe.
Joanne Chase, Head of Commercial Law and Solicitor of the Planning Committee today.
Richard Williams, Democratic Services.
Okay, everybody else has got their name in front of them, so when they speak, anybody looking from outside can see who you are. We've got a relatively light agenda, dare I say it, today, but the first one is in respect of Church Cottage, Bayfield Road, Mountain. It's DM 2022-00518, and we're going to look at this together with the second one on our list, which is 00791, which relates to the demolition of the property known as Church Cottage. It makes sense to deal with the two of them together. Oh yeah. So if we could go back to the agenda now that I've explained the way we're going to run the meeting, can we go to apologies for absence?
Yes, Chair. Apologies from Councillors Bryn and Garrett.
Do we have any declarations of interest? No. Can we go to the confirming the accuracy of the minutes of the previous meeting? Has anybody got any points they wish to raise on that? If not, can I have somebody propose that we, Councillor Powell, thank you, and Councillor Webb, thanks very much. We've got the feedback again. Anyway, we'll have to deal with the feedback, I'm afraid. So we can then go to item 4.1. So, as I say, I did explain at the beginning of the meeting that we will be having a slight departure in that we're dealing with the two together. And Phil Thomas, you're doing the presentation?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just bring the presentation up. There we are. Okay, so sorry, I need to go to the item. They're not in sync here. Sorry, there we are. Okay, thank you. Right, so this application, it comprises a detached dwelling sited to the east of the lane running through the hamlet of Mountain, which is that it's marked in that red box there. You can see on the wider site plan there. So Mountain's a little hamlet to the south or west of Chepstow, and it's partly associated with the old Mountain House, which is on the bank above it. So the property is of traditional design, that's it there, sited at a lower level than the road. That's at the back of the property, so the lane is on the other side. It's outside any defined settlement boundary, and it's within the AONB. It's on the edge of the AONB, but within it. It's within the mountain conservation area, the wider conservation area, and most of its garden, but not the house itself, is within a Cadw Registered Historic Park and Garden. I'll show you a plan of that later. The application site is within close proximity of the Mountain House estate, that's on the bank behind it, above it, which comprises a group of listed buildings and structures. And there is a tree within the site covered by a tree preservation order. The site is within a C2 flood zone, as shown on the development advice maps that accompany technical advice note 15, which is the flooding technical advice note. So the application seeks consent for a replacement dwelling on the site as the existing property regularly floods. The property is not currently occupied due to previous flooding damage, resulting in the occupiers having to vacate. The proposed property is designed to prevent future risk of flooding of the dwelling. The replacement dwelling is proposed with a contemporary design, which I'll come on to, and will be sited within the same general area as the existing dwelling. So that's a plan showing the registered park and garden in green. It's mainly associated with the original Mountain House group of buildings here, and you can see it does extend down the bank and into the garden of the application property, which is there, but doesn't include the application property and the church to the south of the application site. So that's the existing property, which is it's perpendicular to the road primarily, with a conservatory towards the stream edge, and the church is to the left-hand side of that. So those are elevations of the existing property. And that shows the flooding levels and what is needed to take the new dwelling above the flood zone. So I'll leave it at that for the moment. That's the proposed site plan. So it shows an L-shaped property. So the property is slightly differently orientated. Well, it's got a linear orientation with the road, but it's in broadly the same area as existing. So, as the proposal is for a replacement dwelling, there's no requirement for a contribution towards affordable housing to be made. The site is, as I've said, in a C2 flood zone, as identified by the development advice maps that accompany TAN 15. This use is classified as highly vulnerable. However, as the proposed development would not increase the existing level of vulnerability on the site or intensify the use, then no objection is raised to the principle of replacing this dwelling. As noted, it's outside any development boundary and therefore classified as open countryside. The land is, as I said, benefiting from a lawful residential use, and no objection is raised in respect of its replacement. And in terms of policy H5, which relates to replacement of dwellings in the countryside, this provides criteria against which such applications are considered. And in this case, the proposed development is considered to comply with the criteria of that policy, including the relative increase in volume of the proposed compared to the existing dwelling, which at 17% increase is well within the tolerances set out in the policy. The application site is within the AONB and the conservation area, with part of the site, the garden, i.e. the area to the south of the stream is shown there, and to the east, the large area that we saw yesterday on site to the east, being within the designated park and garden, but not the property itself and its immediate driveway and curtilage to the west. The property is noted for its social value due to its association with Henry Avery Tipping, who was a notable garden designer and architectural editor of Country Life, who extended and renovated the original property in 1908. The existing dwelling adopts a traditional design aesthetic. However, it's not considered to make such a positive contribution to the visual amenity of the area that its loss would be of significant concern. The property, as we've seen in previous photos, there we go. The property has undergone various iterations and additions and alterations that have eroded its original character, with significant additional damage being caused by flooding in recent years. The property is not listed and therefore does not benefit from the protection afforded to listed properties. Given its location, careful consideration has been given to the impact of the proposal upon the amenity and character of the area. The proposed design, bear with me, sorry. There's the ground floor, open plan largely with a single-storey garage towards the lane, and first floor, bedrooms and en suites, roof plan. Yeah, so the proposed design adopts a contemporary aesthetic and is considered to be of a high quality. The scale, form and siting of the proposed dwelling is considered to be appropriate for the setting, avoiding any unacceptable adverse visual impact that would warrant concern or that would be harmful to the special character of the conservation area or to the setting of historic assets nearby. The majority of the built form would be set back from the road, therefore allowing the structure to easily assimilate into its setting and reduce any visual impact when viewed from the public realm. So that's the view from the road, the lane. That's the view from as if you were standing near the stream looking back towards the property. And then that's the side. You can see the bridge that's proposed over the stream where there is an existing crossing. And that's the back of the garage. And then that's the elevation, as if you were looking towards where the parking area was yesterday that we stood on in the garden and looked back towards the existing property. You can see the church greyed out in the background there. So the scale and siting of the development is such that it would have minimal impact upon green infrastructure or biodiversity interests. The materials as detailed within the submission are considered to be acceptable, and the use of natural, locally sourced materials considered to further enhance the design and support the placemaking objectives as set out by Planning Policy Wales. It is considered necessary for details or samples of the external materials to be submitted for approval by officers prior to commencement of the development. The Council's Heritage Officer has been consulted on this application and raises no objection. The proposed dwelling would be located immediately adjacent to the Grade 2 Registered Historic Park and Garden at Mountain House, and the gardens of Church Cottage are partly within the registered area, having been laid out around Mountain Brook by Tipping in 1908. The level of the ground floor and access to the property need to be raised to address the risk from flooding. This is considered to be an acceptable justification for such works and is not considered to have any unacceptable adverse visual impact that would be harmful to the surrounding landscape or historic environment. The proposed design has been carefully considered to ensure its physical and visual relationship with its setting and neighbouring buildings is acceptable. CADU have been consulted and raised no objection to the proposed works and no concern to the impact of the development upon the special character of the area or the historic assets nearby. So just looking, that's a visualisation looking from the lane. That's a similar shot but taken further to the north. That's looking towards not too far from where we stood the other day, and looking back towards the south. You see the garage at a lower level to the right-hand side there. And then that's a visualization showing the relationship of the church. So you can see the existing dwelling on the top, which is 1.4 metres below the existing height of the church. And then a sort of intermediate scheme, which is if you like, a concept scheme. If you were to put a conventional modern house with a pitch roof on there, which would be 2.3 metres above the church, and then the actual proposal itself at the bottom, which is kept down in terms of height because of the flat roof, which would mean it would be 0.4 metres below the height of the church, and that's in spite of the finished floor level being 1.4 metres higher than the existing cottage to manage the flood risk for the proposed dwelling. And then that's showing a similar situation there, showing the relationship from the lane. When you're actually, it's slightly artificial view because you wouldn't get that sort of distance view to it as we saw with the topography, but it gives an indication of the relative scale of the proposed dwelling at the bottom there with the church compared to the existing above. So those are the issues. So due to the scale of the proposal and its relationship with nearby dwellings, it's not considered that there would be any unacceptable impact upon the living conditions of any neighbouring occupiers. The existing access is proposed to be widened slightly, which has been noted as an improvement by the authority's Highways Department, and no objection is raised in terms of highway safety. As noted, it's within the C2 flood zone, as shown on the TAN 15 maps, and C2 zones are areas of the floodplain without significant flood defence infrastructure. The proposed development is classified as highly vulnerable, with the TAN stating that in such areas only less vulnerable development should be considered, subject to the application of a justification test, including acceptability of consequences. However, given that the property is existing and the proposal would replace one dwelling with another, the level of vulnerability would not increase from the existing situation. Therefore, it's not considered justified to apply the justification tests as set out within Section 6 of the TAN. The flood consequences assessment submitted to support the application has been deemed acceptable by Natural Resources Wales to overcome any concern in relation to flood risk. NRW raised no objection to the proposed development on flooding grounds. The Community Council, local member and one member of the public have raised concern over the contemporary design and finish of the proposed development and its impact upon its setting. Must acknowledge that design is subjective, and guidance from Welsh Government regarding design is found within Technical Advice Note 12, which states local authorities should not impose architectural styles or particular tastes, but should secure good quality design as applied to the local context. The design and impact upon the character and setting of the area has been assessed as acceptable by your officers. So if I could just then turn to the conservation area consent issue, i.e. the demolition of the existing dwelling. It's noted that Mountain Conservation Area forms two parts, the Grade 2 star listed Mountain House and Gardens, and secondly, the hamlet of Mountain, set below Tipping's house in the Dell. Church Cottage is situated in the hamlet, close to the parish church, and is not read in conjunction with Mountain House above. The building is of an appropriate scale and mass in the conservation area and follows a traditional architectural style. However, the cottage has been modernised with a concrete tiled roof, UPVC windows, cement render and a modern conservatory to the front. The current building is considered to make a neutral contribution to the special character of the area, neither detracting from nor positively enhancing the character or appearance of the conservation area. There are three criteria to consider when assessing the demolition of a building in a conservation area. In terms of the first, the condition of the building and the costs of repair. In this case, the building is situated adjacent to the mountain brook and is within a flood zone. The building has suffered from extensive flooding, causing severe damage. It is no longer being used. There is no internal fabric of historical value intact within the building. Flood damage means that the costs of refurbishment are substantial, and given the clear risk of another flood event, this is not considered to be economically sensible. Flood prevention will be required, which will modernise the building, further and change the character and appearance of the building. The building already has a modern character and has little evidential historic value. The grounds and water gardens that extend down from Tipping's design gardens at Mountain provide the only remaining historic evidential value to the site. It is therefore considered that the circumstances of the site meet this first criterion. Secondly, what are the efforts that have been made to keep the building in use? The building is residential in use and character, and there are no reasons to suggest an alternative use is necessary. The current use remains the most viable in its present location and in line with current planning policy. However, the use is hindered by the position of the building in the flood zone. The works of restoration of the house, together with the cost of flood prevention measures, are significant. Therefore, it's proposed to replace the building and incorporate flood prevention within the new design. As discussed before, the building holds limited architectural or historical value in the conservation area, and therefore, when balanced against the costs of repair, it is not considered necessary to retain the building. The proposed new building maintains an appropriate use in the conservation area and within the current land use policies. Lastly, the merits of the replacement dwelling. The proposed replacement dwelling takes a different and more contemporary architectural approach when considered against the existing. The proposed dwelling is a two-storey with a flat roof, uses timber cladding and natural local stone as the main palette of materials. The proposed building is an L shape from adjacent to the road, but is seen as a linear rectangle set back from the road with a flat green roofed carriage at the front. As said, the existing building is a vernacular-style cottage in the conservation area and does not detract from the character or appearance of the conservation area. However, the test is considered as neutrality or betterment. The proper management of conservation areas is not to insist on all developments within it being the same or a copy of previous building types. Effective management of the conservation area involves enhancement and incorporation of complementing but sometimes contrasting architectural styles to create interest and local identity. Overall, it's considered that a new architectural style that takes its cues from the existing context and locality will positively enhance the character of the conservation area. A modern approach to architecture is welcome to add variety and interest within the hamlet, maintaining and protecting the key important characteristics of the existing setting. So therefore, both the planning application and the conservation area consent application are recommended for approval. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Phil. And before I ask the local member to speak, can I remind everybody to, if you want to put your hand up, can you do it in the chat rather than on, particularly Dale and Faye on the screen there. It's much easier if you put your hand up in the chat. So we've had, there's been objections from Mathen Community Council, but there's nobody here from them today, and we will be playing an audio recording from Martin Hall's applicant's agent. But first, Councillor Louise Byrne, local member.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm here as the ward member for Shire Newton Community Council. The replacement dwelling in this application is of a modern style building to replace a more traditional style building within a small hamlet in a conservation area and an area of natural beauty in Mountain. The landscape contrast between the two buildings with its impact on the setting next to Mountain Church is illustrated by comparing the plan drawing of the existing and the proposed northwest elevation in context. The use of stone at the bottom of the property reflects both the property to the right coming from the roundabout to the church and the church itself. The box-like top to the building with black slates is in sharp contrast to its local setting and may appear to have an institutional-like appearance out of keeping with its local context. Unfortunately, the black timber colour will not fade to silver birch. Whilst the site visit was during a warm summer day, the area gets very dark and dull for much of the winter months. The current cottage has been described as unobtrusive, which is side onto the road, but the proposed building will be more prominent as it faces the road. According to the Mathen Community Council comments, although recognising the flooding issues posed at this site and the architectural merits of the proposed dwelling, it was felt that it was the wrong building for this location. The current cottage sits subserviently in its conservation area of Mountain Church at present, but the proposed building does not. The proposal does not blend in, complement or reflect the local vernacular, and its proportions and lines are at odds with the other dwellings in the hamlet of Mountain. The materials proposed similarly are at odds to those elsewhere within the conservation area and hamlet. For the above reasons, the Community Council would recommend refusal. In terms of planning policies, DES1 Section C refers to the sense of place, and Section G refers to the need to use the vernacular tradition where appropriate. In terms of the area of natural beauty, policy LC4 refers to the degree to which the design, quality and use of appropriate materials harmonise with the surrounding landscape and built heritage. LC5 also mentions the importance of traditional features and patterns. TAN note 12 on design, which has already been referred to, refers to good quality design as applied to the local context and also mentions in brackets local distinctiveness. On the site visit, as you drove from St Lawrence's Road prior to Mountain, there is a loss of character to the area due to the variety of house designs. Conservation is about preserving or enhancing the character or appearance of the area. As commented on previously, does this type of building do so? The existing building has been described in the heritage statement as unobtrusive, but this building is in stark contrast to that, and there are no other properties with a block-like appearance or using black exterior timber cladding. It will be a prominent change, and the area may, as a result, lose its character, and the importance of the church within this small hamlet may be compromised. There is absolutely nothing wrong with this modern design, but the question for consideration by the Planning Committee is whether or not this style of building and its use of exterior black timber cladding materials, its non-traditional box-like shape and design, is out of character within its proposed conservation and area of natural beauty setting, and whether or not it is more appropriate for a more modern housing estate. I will listen to the debate to see if the Planning Committee are minded to refuse this application for the policy reasons I have stated and the arguments from the Community Council. However, Chair, I would like to speak again prior to the vote in relation to Condition 4 of this report and Condition 5 of the next report prior to the vote. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Louise. And we, as I said earlier, we don't have any objectors to address this, but we do have the audio which Craig will put up now.
Thank you, Chair. This is an audio from the applicant's architect, Mr. Martin Hall.
Proposing the replacement of a cottage in an idyllic hamlet is clearly not a matter to be taken lightly, but reflects the reality confronting the applicants who have endured the traumatic experience of being flooded out of their home on several occasions over the last decade. This situation is not merely heartbreaking for the household, it is potentially ruinous as Mountain Brook floods more frequently and severely, making Church Cottage practically uninsurable. Any proposal must therefore deal with the simultaneous challenges of substantially raising the ground floor level by over half a storey to prevent the future risk of flooding, while not overwhelming the petite scale of the surroundings, particularly the diminutive church next door. The existing dwelling may be considered broadly traditional in style, but in reality presents quite a hostile, blank face to the lane which it sits directly alongside. The scheme being considered by the Planning Committee today has been developed with considerable care as a direct response to the particular sensitivity of its setting. The application documents explain in detail how key questions of scale, materials and design have been addressed with the precise intention of respecting the intimate valley setting of Mountain. Members of the committee are encouraged to study the design and access statement, which sets out the thinking behind the design. This document succinctly lays out a series of explanatory points that are supported by 90 illustrations, which should leave little room for doubt concerning the multi-layered thought that has gone into the proposal. The scheme is generously set back from the lane and church, far more so than the existing dwelling, and uses this breathing space to quietly place the minimalist, pavilion-like building into the notable early 20th century Japanese-inspired garden which surrounds it. Now, clearly, just because something has been designed with a high degree of care, it should not automatically be granted approval. However, it may lead the committee to question the dismissive opinions put forward by the objecting party, and to give appropriate scrutiny to viewpoints which seem largely subjective. Indeed, it is unclear how the proposal's use of local stone and naturally treated timber could be fairly described as, to quote, at odds to materials used elsewhere within the conservation area and hamlet, unquote. Few would judge the existing dwelling's pink cement render, concrete roof tiles and PVC windows as reinforcing the vernacular identity of Mountain. The oppositional commentary in this instance would seem to be an outlier, with 6 community households from Mountain writing in support of the application versus a single objection. Supporters include the owners of Mountain House, the listed arts and crafts building with shared design connections to the application site. CADU have no objection to the scheme, noting, the design of the proposed dwelling gives due consideration to the physical and visual relationship between the new dwelling and its sensitive setting in Tipping's water garden. By employing a contemporary flat roof design, it also ensures that the roof line of the new dwelling is below the ridge height of the adjacent Church of St. Andinus, unquote. Monmouthshire's conservation officer also does not object, commenting, the design of the proposed dwelling is very modern, in contrast to the existing multi-period dwelling, but has been carefully designed and is located set back from the road within the plot. Whilst the proposed dwelling is different to the existing, the size, scale and mass is deemed appropriate for its setting. So in summary, on behalf of the applicants, we encourage the Planning Committee to follow the Council's own planning officer's recommendation and grant approval for the application.
Thanks for that, Craig. So we'll open it up now to members. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Chairman. I think actually the pictures are perhaps a little bit misleading. I would like to ask the officers, is the roof of timber that really is black like that, or is it just how it's come out on the pictures? Because I would have thought, I'm trying to think of all sorts of timber I've ever seen. I've never seen black timber unless it was painted black. So I'm wondering if that's just a bit misleading. I mean, otherwise...
It's going to be charred.
Oh, charred. Ah, that's different. It'll be more brown now. Yes, it's not like a matte black surface like so here. I think that might have put people off a little bit. I mean, I can't say anything wrong with it. I think it's a great thing to rebuild something that can be lived in. I mean, to have a house that's flooding all the time must be heartbreaking. And I think the design is quite good. I don't see why everything has to be completely put into the last century to blend into a small village. If we were like that, none of the houses we've had today would ever be built because we'd still be building old thatched cottages out of rough stone. We have to move on and accept that I'm sort of a little bit dubious about the colour of it. I don't think it's going to look quite like that when it's finished, even because charred isn't exactly black. It's more brown. So I'd like to support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. Yes, it is lower. If it was a more traditional design, it would be very imposing, having been lifted up and would dwarf the church. I get that point.
Chair, do you want me to clarify this?
Yeah, would you like to come in?
So in late correspondence, there was quite a bit of it yesterday. There's a part from the design and access statement submitted by the architect which explains how they would treat the timber. So it's a charring process. Apparently it's an old Japanese technique, and there's the actual name of it in late correspondence, which I won't repeat because I can't remember what it is. But yeah, so it'll give it a sort of blackish, dark grey appearance. So rather than brown. So just to clarify, I appreciate that some of the visuals there, they presented it as a slightly lighter colour, but I think it will be not completely black. You'll still see the tones of the wood through it, but it will be very dark. Put it that way. Yeah, black stroke dark grey.
Thank you, Phil. Jane.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mrs Thomas, for the presentation. It was interesting to view the site of Church Cottage yesterday and to see its layout to the other dwellings and to the church. It is unfortunate to have to demolish a dwelling of any kind. However, the house has flooded for many years and therefore is uninhabitable. Whilst the house may have old original parts to it, none of this is visible, and its character has been lost over the years. Therefore, I see no reason to refuse demolishing it due to its heritage or its character. Monmouthshire has a housing shortage, and therefore it would be favourable to see this property brought back into the housing stock. An empty property has no benefit to a community or to the county, and over time, all it will do is fall into dilapidation, which in turn would not be aesthetically pleasing to the character of the area, especially because it is next to an old quaint church and also in a conservation area. I acknowledge that concerns have been raised about the style of the building, and I take them on board. In 6.1 of the Office report, it states, design is subjective and guidance from Welsh Government in relation to design is found within TAN 12, which states local authorities should not impose architectural styles or particular tastes, but should secure good quality design as applied to the local context. If you look back over history, we have had many styles of houses, ranging from Tudor houses to Georgian houses to Victorian houses to the present day house, which is sustainably built and more contemporary. And therefore one day, many years from now, this style of house will be part of the historical makeup of the housing stock. Therefore, we are in a period of change of which we must embrace and accept. I note that the house is to be built to a higher level in order to prevent flood damage, and I have 3 questions around this. So firstly, with flooding becoming more frequent and flood levels becoming higher over the years, will the dwelling be built to a high enough standard in order to cope with the heights that the flooding may be in 50, 75, 100 years from now, for example? My second question is, are any other flood defences being put into place to protect the parking area, the garden, garage, outbuildings, etc.? And thirdly, occupants of the dwelling are likely to be car owners due to the semi-rural location. How high do the floodwaters get and what measures are in place to protect the vehicles? I do support this application for approval, and I hope to see this dwelling back in use, the owners contributing to the community and the county, and another house back in the Monmouthshire housing stock. Thank you.
Thanks for that. Phil, there was a couple of points there about the flooding levels. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, sorry, we're just going to look, because it does address the flooding in the design access statement.
Do you want me to move on to Councillor Carrad and then come?
Yeah, what I will clarify, that the actual floor plan of the ground floor plan has been raised 1.4 metres higher than the existing cottage, and they'd worked that out as being, taking it above the 1 in a 1,000 year flood?
Yeah, 1 in 1,000.
Yeah, it's above, 1 in 1,000 year flood risk levels, plus climate change, I think, as well. The garage and driveway would set up 0.8 metres, obviously, because it's less vulnerable. And I presume they would, people will, the parking area is raised 0.23 metres above the 1 in 1,000 year risk, okay, to allow for safe access, So they are taking into account the worst potential flooding risks.
Okay, thanks for that. We'll move on then. Ben.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the presentation, Phil. I quite like this design. I think they've got real challenges there with trying to lift the level up to protect the building from flooding while also not making it too imposing. And a flat roof, I suppose, is the only way you're going to do that. Looks very modern, uses modern building techniques, and I really think we're probably going to see more of this as the climate crisis gets worse and houses become, which previously may not have been vulnerable to flooding, become more vulnerable to flooding. So I'll be supporting this application.
Okay, thank you for that. Jill?
Thank you, Chair. So all the questions I think have been asked, except for maybe the looking at the architectural pamphlet here. It looks like the charred timbers weather, and they do weather to a lighter colour. It appears a lighter grey. Is that correct? And also,
we're looking at different treatments following this charring process, and there are different hues. So some, I suppose it depends really on the method and the type of wood you start off with. Is it worth sharing that? Yeah. We have got a condition there to actually agree a sample of the charred wood. It may weather in due course, but I think the only thing that would do would lighten it really, wouldn't it? As the air and sunlight gets on the...
We've got a sample here.
Yeah.
We'll share it with you now.
and that's the main issue of the
Yeah.
with the people, isn't it?
Okay, members, I'll just share my screen with you. I've just Googled this method. They use this Japanese method to char the wood. It'll just give you a bit of a flavour in terms of what type of images you can see here. So this char grill is char grilling the wood to burn effect, and then you might have some wood in the back, but that would then weather naturally. But what we can do is a condition on the consent to review the materials, so officers could review that and agree that potentially exactly what type of level of char grilling that is, with the delegated panel members maybe to make sure it is dark, so maybe the members could be involved in that decision in terms of the right material for that context. As you can see there in this picture, it is a varied level you can do, so it depends on the intensity of the char grilling of that piece of wood. So I would imagine it would be, well, depending on what members want in terms of whether you want to be more black or whether you want it to be more brown. But maybe the panel could be involved in that decision as part of that condition.
Can I come back, Chair?
I'm happy with that, and listening to, I think most of us heard the comments on site. It was the blackness that was worrying, particularly that lady from the Community Council. Sorry, Jill, you want to carry on?
I was only going to say yes. From what they're saying, the lighter the better, I guess. Thank you, because the dark area.
Councillor Riley, Sue.
Thank you, Chair. I note that CADU have no objections. I think the points have all been made that it would become dilapidated. It's not habitable and probably isn't repairable without ridiculous cost. I think traditional, to me, I'm not quite sure what that describes. To me, it looked like a 70s pub. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful design in a beautiful setting, and I would support it.
Okay, thanks for that. Sue McConnell.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the presentation. It was really helpful. I'd just like to echo what Councillor Riley was saying, really. I think it is a beautiful design. I'm in favour of it. I think it's a good idea to review the material, because I think that was the one concern, was the sort of the idea of a pitch black exterior. And I think the idea of leaving that to the panel would be a good idea. And the other thing I would just like to comment really is that when a building is going to be replaced in a beautiful area like this, it's wonderful to see a proposal of such high quality. So it's not just a bog standard house, it's something really quite special. Thank you.
Thanks for that. I've got nobody else has got their hands up. In that case, I'll ask Councillor Brown if she'd like to sum up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you to the committee for their comments, and thank you for the supportive comments with regard to the colour of the black timber. I think on the plan it does actually say that it's black timber, and I note that the report in condition 4 and the subsequent report on conservation states that it's necessary to submit samples to the planning authority. However, it is black timber, albeit the pictures suggest it may be an altogether different colour. It is clear from the late correspondence that this colour will not fade to a silver birch colour. Also, any condition on the colour needs to last for perpetuity, as pointed out on another application by a former councillor who was also a planning officer for another authority. If the head of planning remembers, we had a report, I think in in my ward area, and the planning officer mentioned about the materials having to be kept the same over perpetuity so that the condition would last. What I would suggest, Chair, is that the samples go to the delegated panel, but obviously the concern is the most light colour that can be possible, because I think it was the stark, very dark black timber that was the major concern. And if as local member I could also be invited to when that panel has that discussion or see the samples or something like that, that would be very helpful. I think you showed that picture, and I think there was almost a picture of a sort of a black that was almost like a very light grey, wasn't there? I think on the samples that you were showing us on the screen, and I think obviously that is one of the major concerns, and particularly since the area apparently does get very dull in winter, and I think it's the dark timber the dark black timber that is of concern. So if the committee are willing, perhaps we could add those as a condition, Chair, about the sample, the delegated panel and the perpetuity period, and the preference for it to be as light as possible. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Brown. We're just having a chat here. Can we just take a straw poll? The lighter, the better. We don't bother to put a vote up. Richard, we can stick our hands up for this. The lighter, the better, midway, or really dark. Let's go for the lighter, the better. Hands up if you're in for that, like Councillor Brown saying, the very light grey.
I think if it's, like light is just white, and I don't think that's where dark woody tones to dark grey is kind of,
Yeah. Is that the general consensus? Everybody? Jill, have you got any particular thoughts on the shade? Okay, well, anyway, sorry, Sue.
The design is clearly quite Japanese about the design, and so you do want that sort of, you want that the darkness is fine. My concern is just, and I was picking up from local people, was that pitch black, matte black was not desirable, and I think it would be worth the delegated panel discussing that with the architect and getting an understanding when the decisions are made.
Okay, it was just to get a feel for how you felt when we come to have a look at it. That's all. Okay, then. So we have recommendations from officers for approval on both of them. We have to vote separately on them. Councillor Brown?
Yes, Chair. Before you vote, would you be able to amend the conditions on the perpetuity and the colour? And what sort of conclusion have you reached on the colour with this discussion? Because I'm not quite clear.
The general consensus was it needs to be on the dark side, but not black. I think reading the room, yeah, everybody's nodding their heads. We don't need. It's coming before us anyway, isn't it?
Do you want me to come into the perpetuity? Yeah, in terms of the condition, Councillor Brown, it's in a conservation area, so any recladding of the building would need planning consent in its own right. However, there's no reason why we can't put perpetuity onto the condition as well. That's not an issue. So, yeah, that's something that can be accommodated quite easily.
We don't have to specifically put that in the vote now, do we?
No. I think that we just had that as a condition, as part of that same condition.
Okay, so we need to vote on these separately. Advice I've been given is we should vote on the demolition first. So, Richard, can you put that one up, please?
Yes, it has to be don't want anything added to it.
No, just as it is. Dale, apparently, I didn't notice that you put your hand up. Did you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. I was only going to say you tend to find darker colours will disappear into the background better than light colours. So, so I was just going with the consensus of the group chair, darker rather than lighter.
Okay, thanks for that. We did get a proposer and seconder as we went along, but just to formalise it, I know Councillor Powell proposed it and Ben Callard seconded it. So, as I say, we picked that up as we went along, but just for the sake of it. So, the recommendation is for approval. Most of you have voted. And for some reason, I can't get my... Oh, there it is. Joe?
Yeah, that's carried. Yeah, okay.
Okay, thanks. And Richard, can we have the other vote up now, please? Can I ask everybody if they'll cast their vote now, please?
So that's carried. Yeah, approved.
Okay, thanks very much, everybody. We now move on to DM 2022-00699, which is the address is 1 Connegree, Pillville, Caldicott. Caldicott Town Council recommends approval. We don't have anybody talking on this. So, Phil?
Yep, thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Chair. Yes, the one we looked at yesterday as well. It's that area you can see there on the plan, edged in red, the sort of more southerly area there. So Connegree, as we saw, was a row of 5 properties accessed off Pill Row within the Caldicott development boundary. In 2008, full planning permission was granted for 4 dwellings. There was a subsequent application approved for a 5th dwelling to be provided a year later. All 5 dwellings are now occupied and have been for quite a long time. There is an area of land to the south of number 1 Connegree that was identified as communal parking for 7 vehicles. This area of land between number 1 Connegree and Deepweir Gardens has been surfaced in gravel and surrounded by garden fences. When the 4 houses were originally approved, there was a condition imposed on the approval requiring the area of land to be laid out for parking and service provision for the dwellings, all the dwellings, and retained as such. The occupier of number 1, i.e. the applicant, has now purchased the land to the south of their property from the original developer and wishes to use the land as residential curtilage, both for parking and garden area. A timber gate has been erected at the entrance of this land. I'll show you some photos for those. Yeah, so that's the original plan which showed the layout of it with the 5 parking spaces there shown on the layout there. And then that's where we were yesterday, and you can see there's the fence and gate popped across the access, so nobody can access it now due to the ownership issues, and number 1 owns it and is not allowing access to the other properties. That's photos showing the actual area behind the fence, behind the gate rather. Shows it there. And then that's the area which number 5, I think it's on the end, and then number 1 is out of shot where the gate is. It shows the parking area, and then again showing number 3 and 4 there, and 5 on the end. And then that's those are the issues. So the one primary consideration in this case is how the proposal would affect the interests of highway safety. This hinges on whether there is sufficient parking within Connegree to provide for the existing 5 properties without using the parking provision which is the subject of this application to the side of number 1. The entire site and its access road are private land and don't form part of the public highway. When the houses were approved in 2008, the parking standards at the time would have required 2 off-street parking spaces per dwelling. A plan was submitted at the time that showed that this could be achieved. The 4 initial properties were constructed as 3-bedroom dwellings, and therefore, under the current adopted parking standards, each would have to be provided with 3 parking spaces. The design of the initial application provided that hard-standing space in front of each of the dwellings, and then the additional spaces within the area of land now under consideration as curtilage. The remaining frontage was to be turfed, and the largest space in front was either a hard-standing or a small grassed area. Whoops, what's happened there? Sorry. Let's go back to the... There we go, sorry, apologies for that. The remaining frontage was to be turfed, and the largest space in front was either a hard-standing or a small grassed area to accommodate a protected tree. However, the current adopted parking standards were introduced in 2012 before this development was approved, and as such, the properties do not adhere to them, and in many cases, it's difficult or impossible to retrospectively apply such requirements. The parking standards should not be applied retrospectively. The previous application for 4 dwellings need to comply with the standards that were in existence at the time. Since the approval in 2008, the mature tree in the centre of the site has been felled. It wasn't covered by a tree preservation order, by the way, and there is now additional informal parking in front of the dwellings. From the site visit yesterday, it was apparent that most properties in Conagry had 2 parking spaces, or at least 2 parking spaces available to them, mainly in front of each of the properties. The exception is number 2, which has scope for just 1 space in front, although we noted that there was room to park in the frontage on the approach to numbers 1 and 2. There's quite a wide driveway there. We could easily park and then be able to get round them to access numbers 1 and number 2, Conagry. The Highway Authority officers offered no objection to the proposal to remove the condition. They consider that there's enough space afforded to accommodate parking in the frontage of the properties without needing to rely on the additional spaces on the application site to the side of number 1. So in conclusion, it's considered there's sufficient parking provision within Conagry to provide the required parking spaces without having a detrimental impact on the adjacent public highway. The removal of this condition from the original approval to allow the land in question to be used as curtilage rather than additional parking is considered acceptable and will not have a detrimental impact on the safe use of the highway, and therefore the proposal complies with LDP policy MV1 and is recommended for approval. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Phil. And we've got nobody registered to speak on this. I think most of us were there yesterday. One thing that struck me particularly was the fact that it's fenced off and there's no access to everybody else now. Whether there's any legal issues between the parties there, I don't know. That's a matter for them, but certainly not anything which is before us this afternoon. So, Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Chairman. I stood and looked at it yesterday, and where number 2 and number 3 meet, there's a sort of line down the houses, and the 2 vehicles of number 3 had encroached over that. If they'd kept within their actual proper curtilage, there would probably have been room for 2 vehicles to park outside number 2. It's just that they'd sort of ooched over a bit, and there was a space the far side of their first car, between them and number 4, that if they parked untidily, there would have been room for 2 in front of number 2. So I think, you know, it's just a case of managing their parking a little bit more tidy. But and otherwise, and also there is that other area to park where the car was parked, wasn't at all in anybody's way. I'm sure there's plenty of parking there.
And you definitely get a refuse vehicle or an emergency vehicle.
No problem.
Refuse vehicles probably park on the road. I doubt they go.
No, I don't think they would.
No.
Like.
Okay. Thanks for that.
So I'm for it.
Jane.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Thomas, for your presentation. On our site visit yesterday, we saw the layout of the dwellings at Conagry and the parking situation. There are 2 parking spaces per household, which should be sufficient for the size of the dwellings. The exception is number 2, who has 1 parking space. However, originally when the houses were built, it looks like one of the 2 spaces has been converted to a path and an area of decorative white pebbles, which could easily be put back into a parking space, presumably without planning permission, and I'm sure that officers will be able to give guidance on that. There is space within the perimeter of the compound for visitor parking, as was demonstrated yesterday when there was a visitor to number 2, and also unrestricted roadside parking just outside of the compound. Therefore, visitors do have somewhere to park sufficiently safely and nearby. During the visit, I did note that if a car parked at number 1, then the length of the car would protrude over the access of the piece of land in question, which would block the access to the parking area anyway. And I do note that this has also been stated within the officer's report. It should also be noted, as Phil, our chair, has already said, that any alleged parking disputes, particularly on private land, are a civil matter and not a planning matter. So that's therefore something that we are not here to consider today. Nonetheless, regardless of these points, the fact remains that the applicant has purchased the piece of land in good faith from the developer. The applicant is now the sole owner of the land, and therefore it is now private property. When the previous landowner sold the land, at that point, it would have been accepted that the piece of land was not needed or indeed used often enough to warrant the upkeep of it or the necessity to keep it. I therefore support the approval of this application and see no reason to object to it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Okay. Councillor Bonfield?
Hi, sorry, I was trying to get off mute. Yeah, just echoing what Councillor Powell and Councillor McKenna have said, and I would support this because without the condition being lifted, the land is just going to go into disrepair and be neglected. So yeah, I'd support.
Okay, thanks very much for that. I've got nobody else on my my screen.
Dale's just gone.
Dale's gone up. Okay, Dale.
Thank you, Chair. This is just to make other members of the committee aware that there is a covenant on that piece of land, as we found out earlier today. Though having a covenant on the piece of land doesn't prevent us from deciding on this, because any legal stuff around that covenant would be a civil matter. But just making people aware, Chair, that there is a covenant on that piece of land that allows access for the neighbours to use it as for parking. Though that isn't for us to consider here today, Chair, it is a civil matter. Just making people aware. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks for that. Right, so I've got nobody else on there. Councillor Riley, your microphone's on. Did you want to say? Oh, sorry. All right, just checking. So we've got an officer recommendation for approval. Can we have a recommendation from the floor, Ben and Jane? Okay, thanks for that. So Richard, can we have the vote in up, please? Okay, if you'd all like to vote now.
That's approved.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Thanks, everybody. We move on to the next one, which is DM 2021 0037. This is the erection of one detached two-storey house in part of the garden with associated access and parking. It was outlined planning permission, and we heard this one at our last meeting. Craig, do you want to just come in before I ask Andrew to make the presentation.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The reason why this application is back before members today is there was a concern put in from a third party with regards to the conversation of Planning Committee and to ensure that the matters that are before Planning Committee were fully understood. So Andrew will go into the detail in a minute, but in terms of the outline planning consents, members did agree with officer's recommendation to approve in the last committee meeting. What we want to confirm today is that the members fully understood that as part of that outline application, we are agreeing the location of the access point, which would be fixed as part of the outline consent, and of the scale of the building, which members did agree a condition amendment last month. But the point of the access would be fixed. In the meeting, we did discuss the driveway and the parking area. That would be a matter for the layout and for matter for the reserve matters. But I just want to bring this application back before members, given this concern raised from third parties, to say that the access would be fixed in that location, given the concerns that they raised as part of the previous report with regards to the impact the potential light would have from cars and vehicles from the access point. Andrew will just give a quick presentation of that concern now, but that's the reason and the rationale as to why it's back, just to confirm those points.
Okay, thanks, Craig. Andrew?
Yep, thank you, Craig, and thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, members. So, yeah, this was at our June Planning Committee meeting, so it's, as noted, it's an outline planning application that's considering access and scale only, and all other matters would be reserved. And as stated, members at the June meeting resolved to approve, subject to the 106 agreement, as well as an amendment to the scale parameter condition that would have seen a lower limit of 4 and an upper limit of 8 metres. And as Craig has stated, it's been represented on a point of clarification. I think that really stems on the debate about this distinction between the access and the driveway parking area and what is within the remit of the outline consent. So just in the terms of clarity, transparency, this application is represented to give some assurance on those points. So I'll just go through the slides now. So this is the application site. The site is on the right-hand side of your screen, and that's the host dwelling, stray leaves to the right, and you can see to the left, or the foreground of the left then, is the single-storey property known as Lindsay, and I believe the property behind that on the left is Cartref, that both, all of which are served by that lane. So just on to the next slide. So again, this is a better view then of the property opposite where the point of access would be. That's the property known as Lindsay. And that's a view looking in the opposite direction, as if one was to be leaving the site, going back towards the main village. This is a view sort of from within the site, effectively at its sort of most sort of southerly point, looking back towards the two neighbouring properties that also share that lane. So actually, this location plan just confirms that's the existing host dwelling, as I've referred to it as, known as stray leaves, and then the red line edge comprises the application site. Again, that's just showing that at a bit more of a manageable scale. So this drawing here, I think, is the pertinent one. You can see, and hopefully Phil, through his cursor, can just highlight there where there would be a break in the hedgerow. That area there is the proposed point of access, and that matter is considered now at this outline stage. So I think that's there was discussion on that, and that's positioning, but to confirm for your awareness and for clarity of any parties observing, that is the access proposed as part of this outline permission. So these are some indicative sketches, and they are just that. As I say, the appearance would follow with a reserve matter, so that is simply for sort of illustrative purposes only. So the main issues we covered in detail and debate. So I'm really going to focus on the matter as to why this is represented. So as stated, the access is on a fixed point and would not form part of the reserve matters. Beyond the access itself, the layout in terms of driveways, parking areas, etc., and other associated hard surfaces would form part of reserve matters, i.e. the layout of the development. And the members will have noted there from the pictures and slides that the access is positioned to the south of the single-storey dwelling that's known as Lindsay, and that this lane serves the host dwelling stray leaves as well as the property known as Car Treff. And officers accept that vehicles in association with those dwellings drive past Lindsay in terms of when they're toing and froing from the site, as opposed to directly towards it. Officers are satisfied that the movements associated with just a single dwelling would not be of such frequency so as to cause unacceptable harm to the amenity of the occupiers of Lindsay or indeed any other property. And similarly, any vehicular movements from the proposed site, i.e. a single dwelling, and those particularly during non-daylight hours where headlights would be used, would be for such a short period of time that it would maintain reasonable levels of amenity and therefore accord with criteria D of policy DES 1. So with that clarification, the application is represented to you today, members, with a recommendation for approval, subject to the updated conditions, as I noted earlier, with regard to scale, as well as the Section 106 agreement to secure a contribution of £12,389 towards affordable housing. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. And yes, we had a good look at this a couple of months ago, didn't we? And there was quite a fair debate at the time, but I do understand the reason for bringing it back now. Does anybody wish to speak on this? Is everybody satisfied that they understand why it's come back, and under those circumstances, are happy to go to a vote? Jill?
Sorry, I didn't quite understand. Did you say that the restrictions have been reduced, or sorry, the restrictions have been increased on the height? Sorry, I didn't really understand what.
No, apologies. Perhaps I could have expanded on that point. As part of the debate previously, there was some concern by members in terms of the sort of maximum scale of the dwelling. So it was agreed that that would be reduced from what was originally proposed down to a maximum of 8 metres to bring it further in line with neighbouring buildings. So that was. Obviously, was it within members' gift to do that, and it's making sure that any decision that's taken now follows that debate and what members wanted at the previous meeting as well.
Thank you.
So that's approved.
Thank you, Joe. Move on to the next one then, which is the last of the ones that we have to consider this afternoon. It's DM 2021-01735. Again, this was one that we looked at before. We determined to defer it to give the applicant the opportunity of coming back with some suggestions which were more acceptable. And Andrew will explain what has gone on between now and then.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So, yeah, members will recall this was an application originally presented at the July 6th committee meeting with an officer recommendation for approval. Further to your own debate on that, this recommendation was not accepted and it was deferred for officers to revisit what's proposed with the applicant and to negotiate further. However, just before we get into that, and for the purposes of clarity, it's worth just running through the slides and what is before us. So this is the application site that's located along Old Barn Way within the town of Monmouth. Abergavenny, I apologise, members. It hasn't translocated across the county. It is Abergavenny. Thank you. So this was the garage. So planning permission was granted in 2019 for a garage, and the drawings you can see on screen now detail that. There was a 4-metre high garage in the rear of the plot. The drawings now on site, on screen, show the garage as built. So that's a height there of just over 5.7 metres. That's the as-built height. What is before members and what was originally presented is on the next slide, which is proposing a reduction of 500 mil to 5.2 metres, and as discussed and debated at the previous meeting, that would involve the eave level also dropping accordingly rather than just a reduction in the pitch of the roof. So that's the proposal as it stands, so not as built, but at a height of, I think it's 5.273. Just moving on to the slides. So this, just a little comparison. So this is the site plan as previously approved, and a sort of street view image as well. And that's contrasted then with the site plan rear view boundary as proposed. I think there's some photographs there just to sort of jog any members' memories, or those that haven't been to the site further to the previous visit. We'll just run through those now. So this is in its as-built form. So that's incomplete, but showing the height of the present garage. Then the next slide shows some views looking up the lane. You can see the garage there in the background. That's looking back down the lane. This is a view then from Old Hereford Road, facing north, as the annotation suggests. And there's another view there from Old Hereford Road with the rear of the properties of Old Barn Way. Oops. Yeah, sorry. Just to the left. So as stated, following deferral at the previous meeting, officers have engaged with the applicant, and effectively there were 3 options for the applicant to consider, which are as follows. Firstly, to revert back to the original 2019 approved scheme, for the garages built to be reduced by a further 500 millimetres, or for the applicant to keep the proposal as it is, i.e. for the garage as built to be reduced from 5.7 to 5.2 metres. But this was having regard, though, to the concerns that had been raised by members at the July meeting. So following the discussions with officers, the applicant wishes the committee to determine the application as originally presented, that being the height to reduce to 5.2 metres. So on that basis, officers would still maintain a recommendation of approval for that change. However, you'll have noted in the officer's report, if members are minded to refuse the application, there is a suggested reason for refusal, which I'll just read for the benefit of anyone watching online. By virtue of its unacceptable scale and mass, the proposal fails to respect the existing form, scale, massing and layout of its setting, and is therefore contrary to criterion C of the Monmouthshire Local Development Plan, Policy DES 1. So that's a suggested reason for refusal. However, notwithstanding that, it is presented to you for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. We've got no speakers on this, but before I ask for members' comments, there was quite a lot of late correspondence from both sides of the argument here. Has everybody had the opportunity of reading it? Yeah? So you're all happy that you've read both sides of the argument. Okay, Ben.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Andrew. this, I guess, doesn't really need to be said, but I was just disappointed that following our debate last time, which I think, was reasonable, that it's come back to us without any amendments. And I have not changed my opinion on this development from our previous meeting.
Okay, thanks for that. Councillor Powell?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Andrew, for that. Now, I feel that if we let things slide too much, there's no point in having planning, because you put plans in and they don't keep to them, and they put up what they want to put up, and because there's lots of argy-barging, in the end, they get away with it. And I think that this shouldn't be allowed, because it's the thin end of the wedge. This will be the first one. Somebody else will say, oh, he managed, he had his big garage and he kept it, and they didn't stop him having it. So I think we've got to watch this in the future, and be careful that people do keep to what they were agreed to in the first place. So I'm sorry, that's how I feel, the same as we did before.
Okay, thanks for that. Nobody else has got their hand up. Dale, are you going to try and catch me out again? Because you always do it just as I'm saying.
No, you're safe in the knowledge that I have nothing to add to this, Chair.
Okay, thanks for that. Right. The recommendation is for approval. Last time we deferred it. There is a reason for refusal if it's that we decide to refuse it. Can somebody propose either approval or a rejection, please? Ben?
Yeah, I'd propose that we reject the application based on the condition that Andrew laid out earlier.
Okay, have I got a seconder for that?
I'll second it.
Okay, so Richard, can we have that up in that form then, please? If anybody wants to approve it, all you've got to do is vote approve. Okay, can you vote now then, please?
So that's been refused.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Well, that's the end of the applications for today, but we have got some notifications of appeals. Does anybody want to run through those?
Just for members' information, we haven't got any comments on them. And
No.
if members want to get involved, they can, once they're consulted on them, they can make representations if they wish.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, that's fine. Everybody's noted them, I take it. Okay, in that case then, thank you very much, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Bye.